Get 5 coffins ready.
Hey everyone, welcome to my guide for Cerberus. Cerberus is a guardian in SMITE who focuses on high damage and high CC. Sounds OP, right? But it requires time and a limited range to perform his damage and CC. Cerberus is usually seen in the solo lane, but like Aphrodite last time, due to the meta, Cerberus is currently shifted off to the support role, where he performs fine. Just know that for most of his lifetime in SMITE, he's been a solo laner. Build-wise, Cerberus loves damage, but he does require you to go a decent amount of defense as well, and in the support role, of course, you want to go full regular support build, filled to the brim with all sorts of defense and counter items. Relics-wise, Blink is a great choice for him, but after its nerf at the start of the season, more power relics like Sunder, Meditation, Horrific Emblem, and Frenzy have taken its place. And of course, if you're going solo with him, you'll need TP to keep up with your lane opponent. Shard-wise, either Horn Shard or Carapace are both fine in both roles, it's just personal preference. Speaking of lane opponents, let's talk about Cerberus' passive. When Cerberus is within 40 units of an enemy, he'll reduce any and all healing done by those enemies apart from HP 5 by 30%, and will be healed for 50% of that heal's heal. So everything from straight up heals to health potions will be gobbled up by Cerberus' passive. This passive is always active, so from your perspective, just kick back and enjoy the extra heals. Keep that 40 unit range in mind though. You can use your second ability's targeter to get a good idea of how close you need to be in order to get the heal. And some opponents, mainly those who actually have healing abilities, will try to back off from you to get that heal off scot-free. So in this sense, you can walk at opponents who are clearly trying to back off and get a heal to get more lane pressure. This passive doesn't give him Odin levels of anti-heal, but it does make him a solid pick into any team with just that bit too much healing. Speaking of Cerberus' second ability though, let's skip to that since it works directly with his first and third abilities. Cerberus breathes out of each of his 3 heads. These heads deal damage over time in this area and will shred protections, while the center head will also apply a slow. This is your quintessential I'm a bruiser and I'm just gonna walk you now type of ability, so in turn there's not a lot of words for it. Keep in mind that you are susceptible to all forms of hard CC while casting this ability, so it is very easy to interrupt. So this ability is walking the fine line between reading your opponent and what they might be capable of, and just using the ability and running at them. Don't forget though that this ability is a great wave suppressant as well though, so don't spend all day trying to make an impact with this ability on your lane opponents, especially if there's any chance that they just use one hard CC ability and stop it dead in its tracks. Speaking of using it though, you may have already noticed that there are Cerb's 3 heads on his passive bar. What's up with that? When Cerb uses his second ability, even if it's just for a moment, he'll have all 3 heads activated. But when Cerb basic attacks, and lands the basic attack, one of their respective heads will be activated, and they activate in the same order every time. Seems like a pain, but keep this option in mind, especially given what you can do when all 3 heads are activated, particularly when it comes to his first ability. Cerberus fires a projectile from his tail, and any heads which are currently activated. The projectiles converge to meet at the end of this triangle-shaped AoE, and while each projectile's damage is the same, any target affected by more than one projectile will take reduced damage from all the other projectiles. It's a good thing though, because not only does all 4 projectiles result in a stun, it's also the hardest hitting single non-ultimate guardian ability in the game. I mean, it does damage multiple times obviously, but you know what I mean, it bursts hard. But speaking of hard, it's hard to hit. The projectiles are slow and the actual area which will result in a stun for Cerb is very small indeed. And from the opponent's point of view, Cerberus has to position himself at a certain range if he intends to hit the stun. Too close and he'll only hit some of the projectiles. The same idea hurts his wave clear potential as well. If Cerb could hit the entire wave with all 4 projectiles, I don't think he'd ever go out of the meta in the solo lane. But alas, he can only hit the melee minions part way and the archers all the way. It's a flawed ability, but intentionally so, as again, a nearly 2-second stun with almost 500 base damage. It's an absolute killer in the early and mid game. As a result, you really want to throw it out whenever you can, but keep in mind that everyone knows you want to go for it. And again, never forget that your second ability sets you up perfectly for it. So if you're ever in a situation where you can maybe just blink 2 or genuinely just walk up in 2, never forget that your 1 is primed and ready to go right after, with that protections, reduction, and slow from your second ability to ensure the first ability hits, and hits hard. All this though does lead it to be rather lackluster in the late game. I mean, most guardians you just blink, use their main hard CC ability and go from there. But not only is that extremely difficult on Cerberus mechanically speaking, it's just unlikely to work. Luckily Cerberus does have an ability that combos wonderfully with blink, but first his third ability. Cerberus leaps forward slowly, and deals damage to any enemies in the AoE upon landing. If he lands on any minions or jungle monsters, he will spawn ghost forms of those enemies which will run at Cerberus but will not deal damage to him. Instead, these minions have their own base health with 0 protections, and his basic attacks will hit in an AoE when attacking these minions, so even if they're mixed in with the regular enemy minions, you can still hit the ghost minions as well. But even better, if any of those ghost minions die, whether they're close or far to Cerberus, he'll be healed for a scaling amount. So instead of basic attacking, you of course want to use your second ability to plow right through these minions instead if you have it, leaping on the minion wave and 2ing for decent wave clear but also that healing on top. Of course, you don't want to leap onto every single wave, that's just going to get you ganked or, in his bad matchups, just straight up soloed. But you do want to use this trick to keep yourself topped up on health whenever you can. The passive is solid, but it's not a reliable way to keep yourself sustained in the solo lane, and you want to flex this self-heal ability as something over your opponents in the support role as well. Other than being tricky to judge at first, since it's so matchup dependent on whether or not you'll immediately get swamped for using it or not, it is just a leap. Use it to get away, use it to engage, time it to avoid certain abilities, and so on. This bonus healing is just a nice little upside to offset its sluggishness. That said, we haven't really seen much for Cerberus to justify leaping in. Well, naturally that's because we have yet to talk about his ultimate. Cerberus becomes CC immune for a short time and generates a massive AoE around him. After his CC immunity ends, he damages all enemies inside the AoE and knocks them up. Keep in mind that this is a great way to instantly kill any ghost minions from your third ability. Then after another second, he throws them in the direction he's currently looking. Before we get to the when and where of when to use this ability, there's a lot of moving parts here that we need to cover first, so let's go in order. First off, as I mentioned, Cerberus is only CC immune for a brief period upon windup, and that final damage is what applies the knockup. So, just because someone is in the ability doesn't mean that they can't avoid it if they got quick fingers and or use their movement ability. This also means that opponents can use knockup immune abilities at the exact moment that Cerberus is about to apply the damage so they can avoid the ability entirely. So unfortunately, against some gods, they don't even have to use their purification beads or CC immune ultimates to avoid the CC portion. So isn't this just a worse version of Ares and Xing Chen ultimates then? Well, we're not finished yet. While the enemies are knocked up, as in before Cerberus throws them, they're still able to be damaged by your allies. So even though they're in the air, it's not like they're banished or anything, so your allies can go on comboing them as soon as you snag them with this ability. Another downside though, during any point of this initial knockup, your opponents can still use their purification beads to break out of the knockup. And as I'm sure you notice, Cerberus loses his CC immunity during this knockup section of the ability, so he himself is also susceptible to hard CC. Luckily though, this won't stop the ability entirely. Say he gets stunned for instance. Here, Cerb will still knock up and throw the enemy, but he can't turn himself to reposition where he wants to throw those afflicted by the ability. So the unfortunate scenario of leaping in and ulting only to be stunned, knocked up, silenced, etc. before being able to flick your mouse around to deliver the enemies to your team will happen while using Cerberus. Well, let's touch on that when and where you want to use this ability then. As you can tell, it's got a lot of flaws, but it's really something you need to be using every fight. Of course, it has the range to potentially pick up the entire enemy team for a great team fight defining ultimate, and you get pats on the back from your team, but this is unlikely to happen, so don't be afraid to just try and snag out one single squishy. Or if you find yourself in a matchup where you can't pick them up easily, say they have beads or an easy cleanse ability, don't forget the ability is still excellent peel. There are plenty of immunities in the Assassin, Warrior, and Guardian classes, but none of those classes like having to deal with an unavoidable peel when trying to dive your backline. So on a rainy day, if you're against a fed solo laner or jungler, it may be time to instead stop trying to 5-man ult the entire enemy team and simply use this ability as a sort of you shall not pass circle. Because when it's down, well, Cerberus is kind of out, in those late game situations anyways. Let's not harbor on the negative though, let's instead do some combos with Cerberus. 2, 1, 3, 4 if you think you can kill. Charge up your heads, 1, 2, chase with your 3 and ultimate. Charge up your heads, blink, ult, scoop back to get in your 1 range and fire it, then 2 and 3 to chase. Blink, ult, 2, 3, and or 1 to chase. For ability leveling, you want your 2 at level 1, your 1 at level 2, and your 3 at level 3. From there, it's a bit of a toss-up between your 2 and 1. You want to level the 2, but you have to weigh your opponent's ability to stop your 2 while you're casting it before you decide to commit to leveling it. From there, you want to max your 3 and put a level into your ultimate at level 5, but skip leveling it until your 1 and 2 are maxed, prioritizing leveling it over the 3 though. So that's Cerberus, a flawed god no doubt. He came onto the Smite scene hot, but once his raw damage numbers came down and builds stopped allowing him to do a million billion damage while being tanky, he's been pretty quiet. In that sense, Cerberus is definitely more of a preference god as he stands rather than a god you pick to crush certain matchups and teams. In terms of what he counters, i.e. low CC, low amount of immunities, and a bit of healing, are all things that other gods in his roles, and even his own class, can outshine him in. But when you see that Skadi or Poseidon or maybe a Surtur on the enemy team and you're picking last or second to last, Cerberus can be just what you want to run them down the entire match and ensure their inability to do anything other than stare at a black and white screen. That's all I have on Cerberus for now. Thanks for watching.